and welcome to Inside Central. This is episode 8 for 16th of September 2011. We're going to be flying Zergerless today. Pete is inadvertently trapped on the west coast of the US, east coast or west coast, I'm not too sure, and couldn't make it for the podcast today. However, in his place, I have a more than suitable replacement for Pete, and his name is Jason Sandys. He's a ConfigMgr MVP, MCSE, MCITP, BS, all the acronyms you want to choose. He's a consultant at Catapult Systems. Has over 15 years of experience in a wide range of technologies. Started his career off within the SMS2 space, and then from there moved on up. So whilst constantly trying, or at least his bio says, whilst constantly trying to improve his own knowledge, Jason is also an active member on the online communities and is a contributing author to the Configurations Manager 2007 Unleashed book. So let's welcome him to the show. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Dan. How you doing? Thanks a lot. It's be a nice, fun experience here today.
Yeah,
let everybody know what's going on.
Absolutely. So this is a different bent for us. We're normally, Pete being an ops man guy, but also with his finger in the cloud. We tend to have a more ops manager bent on this show. So I've got to admit it's great to have somebody with ConfigMgr who can give us a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely targeted at a different space, and Microsoft's really tried to push ConfigMgr kind of to the client space for a long time for a lot of reasons, and ConfigMgr today doesn't have a huge play in the cloud. So kind of the future of ConfigMgr is a little bit of a question mark too, and I'm not sure exactly where Microsoft's going with that. So that'll be an interesting one to see how it unfolds in the next few years also. And then inTune's going to start taking a little bit more center stage here too. So they're really pushing inTune on a lot of folks because it has that cloud presence, and everything's about cloud for Microsoft. So,
right, but I guess inTune's not so much about the cloud; it's in the cloud.
Right, exactly.
Whereas ConfigMgr is an on-premise. For those that don't know, which I'm guessing by our audience isn't going to be anybody. I mean, everyone's going to know about ConfigMgr, but inTune is the ConfigMgr in the cloud, but for an SME market, offloading the responsibility of patch management and these sorts of things off to the cloud, so reducing your infrastructure and also, I guess, reducing your overhead.
Yep, definitely. I mean, it's a great, right? Obviously, I'm deep into ConfigMgr, and I really like it as a product, and I think it does a lot of things. It almost washes the dishes and replaces the kitchen sink and things like that. But
right.
But the way things are going in IT, and I think as a consultant, I see this more and more and more is the software as a service and not necessarily outsourcing people, right? That was kind of the trend at the early part of the 2000s. There was outsourcing the people, using the same tools essentially, but outsourcing the people. But now I think it's really kind of outsourcing the tools, actually outsourcing the real job,
yep.
The work that needs to be done, and that's really where the cloud's at. So that's where I don't know what their plans are for moving ConfigMgr to the cloud as far as that and making it as a software as a service, because most IT departments realize that they don't do things so well. They just have entirely too many demands on them, and they can't do things well because they don't have the resources and time to do that. And so the cloud is obviously the answer to that. At least that's the way Microsoft is framing it, and that's their answer. And a lot of other organizations are doing the same. So it's not just Microsoft.
Right. Sorry, go.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of the interesting play at this point, right? Because the main program manager for ConfigMgr, a guy by the name of Josh Pointer, he did a lot of great things over there. He left the ConfigMgr team, I want to say back in December. Maybe it was a little bit after that, and he actually moved over to the inTune team, so he's in charge of inTune. So that kind of tells you a little bit right there. The direction that Microsoft is thinking, right? The main program manager from one of their premier products moved over to a different fledgling product. That's an interesting statement in and of itself. So
right, I guess it makes sense. It's a natural transition. whilst they're different products, they're not completely different.
Right.
The core functionality is the same, and you make a very valid point, and that is that the purpose of inTune and services like inTune is not to reduce staff. I mean, that may be an inadvertent benefit, we'll say, is to reduce staff overheads, but I guess ultimately it's offloading the responsibility for the server hardware and upkeep and maintenance off to the cloud, giving you the opportunity to concentrate more on enhancing the environment rather than just fighting fires and doing what you do.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, like I said, most IT shops realize that they're so overburdened with the tasks that they have at hand, and they also realize they can't be the experts in everything. Especially medium to small size shops, they can't do all these things because they have to be jack of all trades.
Right.
And that just doesn't cut it anymore. It really doesn't. I mean, we've heard people say that for 10, 15 years, right, in IT, that you can't be the jack of all trades. Well, probably up until about 5 or 6 years ago, you could get away with it and still do pretty well. It's at that time has ended, I think, and it just doesn't work very well anymore.
Right.
And the businesses see the value too, right? Because it's a business proposition. We're paying somebody to make sure this service is working, and so it makes sense to the business now too. Whereas, up until now, even Microsoft, up until a few years ago, they sold to the technical people, the technical directors,
Yep.
And they didn't go into the business, and they figured out, and that's part of the private cloud offering in and of itself is selling to the business, and so things are definitely changing, and for the good. So,
yep.
We all got to find our new places, though.
That we do. Okay, so those in IT are not going to have been able to avoid the fact that the Build conference was this week, or is this week. It's probably closing up as we speak. And one of the main announcements from there was Windows 8. So we got our first real look. I mean, there's been bits and pieces, but we got our first real look at Windows 8 and that new Metro UI, which is all fantastic. And there are plenty of podcasts and blogs and everything else out there on the interwebs that will give you information around that. That's not why we're here. So from an enterprise perspective, I mean, I'm not fussed. I don't care about Metro UI as an enterprise user, and I'm pretty sure you won't either. It may have its benefits on the server side, potentially as a dashboard. But looking at Windows 8 from an enterprise desktop perspective, one thing I did hear earlier this week was if you as an organization are waiting to deploy your next SOE, your next standard operating environment, waiting for Windows 8 and going to skip Windows 7, you're waiting for nothing. There's no real reason to delay doing a Windows 7 deployment because you're not going to get any real additional functionality from Windows 8.
Yeah, that's what I've seen and I've heard too, right? And even in their demos and the things that they showed, it didn't look like the actual desktop, right? You get away from the Metro UI type piece. The desktop was any better. It was the exact same desktop essentially. There were some performance enhancements. I know they showed off a couple of those right off the bat, and
right.
And so I actually loaded it on a tablet. So I have a tablet here at home, and I actually loaded it, and it's great for the tablet itself. But once I flip over to the desktop, there's nothing different, and really, I guess the under piece of that, right? A bunch of folks have already loaded the ConfigMgr 2012 agent on there. We all have access to the beta bits of ConfigMgr 2012, and a lot of us have that loaded. And so a couple of friends, then they've already posted their blogs, hey, we already loaded the ConfigMgr 2012 agent on Windows 8. And it worked fine. It didn't do anything different. And, you look through the file system, it's the same. The desktop's the same. The start menu changed. Obviously, they went to the start page.
Yep.
But there's already blogs out there about how to switch that back. So,
right.
Yeah, I don't see the impact on the enterprise. But the tablets are an interesting play because just like the phones, they're making a big inroads into most enterprises. And once your CEO says he wants something, there's almost nobody who says says no to the CEO in most organizations, or the directors, those folks that sit up in their little I don't know, whatever, either on their clouds and direct
towers,
from high.
Perhaps.
Yeah, but there you go.
Yeah.
And so once they say they need them, so now you have to support them, and so that's kind of the problem with the current generation of tablets out there, right? How do you support iPads in your organization? And there isn't a great answer out there. There's a lot of third parties out there that are doing things, but and I can't say I've looked at any of the products, but that in of itself, right, that there are so many different varieties out there, and that none of them are big players already, except for maybe there's McAfee, I think, has a play, and maybe Symantec, but right, that
Yeah,
just saying those two names makes most people cringe as it is. So
it does, and I must admit that is a beautiful segue, if I have ever seen one, because what we will talk about today, one of the topics, is the new mobile device management capabilities of Configurations Manager 2012. Now, anyone who's listened to the podcast over a period of time will have seen, or at least heard, I should say, a podcast I did with Wally Mead probably about 2 months ago, 6 to 8 weeks ago, where we did discuss a fairly high-level overview of the new features and functionalities of Config Manager 2012. So what I'm hoping to do today, among other things, is to spend some time with Jason and get to know the new features a little bit more intimately, shall we say. To refresh everybody's memory on what is the mobile device management capabilities of Config Manager 2012, why don't you take us through it at a high level, and then we can perhaps dig a little bit deeper.
Sure. So it's not a perfect story. It's still a story in progress. But one of the things they did initially was they essentially sucked in the Mobile Device Manager product. So there was formerly a separate product called Mobile Device Manager. It was exclusively focused on the Windows Mobile platform. So essentially Windows CE devices. And mostly the legacy ones. I mean, at the time, they weren't legacy, but that included things like Windows Mobile 6 and 6.5 and 5, and then Pocket PC 2003, and any other CE devices out there people used on handguns and warehouses. Most people don't realize that CE isn't just a phone thing. All those guns and things you see. When you go into sporting arenas, and I've seen them there before and other places, those are all CE, and so you could have managed that with Mobile Device Manager. So they saw there was a lot of overlap because Config Manager 2007 had some of those same capabilities. So they sucked that product in and essentially incorporated it completely into 2012. Unfortunately, that only takes care of a small population, really, the warehouse guns, things like that. It doesn't take care of those phones that are making it inroad into the organization. So one of the first things they did is they went and they partnered with Nokia, and Nokia was, I think, at the time, and I think they still may be, right, the largest phone vendor in the world. Even though it's not big over here in the United States, it's huge in Europe. And so they went to partner with Nokia and said, hey, we want to manage your Symbian devices. Or maybe the conversation went the other way and Nokia said, hey, we want you all to manage our Symbian devices. So they were pretty far down that road of actually making that happen. And then, of course, everything changed with Nokia. So at this point in the beta, that's still in the product, but it's to be seen whether that'll be an RTM now that Symbian's essentially dead.
Right.
Of course, the other piece that's really huge and is in most enterprises now, of course, are the iPhones and Androids and Windows Phone 7 too, which is a CE-based device, but it's completely different, than any of the other CE-based devices that are out there. And so the question there is, so how do they get that into the product quickly and in a manageable way? So they looked around and said, hey, look, Exchange is already doing a lot of this, right? The Exchange ActiveSync protocol already defined this, and the interface already defined exactly how we go about managing these devices and accounting for them, so inventory. So that's almost the biggest issue in most environments. They're not so worried about making sure that they're pushing software to the devices. They just want to know that they're there. That's the first step. And if most organizations can get that, then they're happy. And ActiveSync already does that, because without connecting to Exchange, there's no reason most people are going to have those mobile devices today.
Right.
So they said, well, let's just leverage ActiveSync. And so that's what they did. So out of the box in 2012 RTM, this is planned, obviously, and it works in beta too today. It'll connect to an Exchange 2010 server. And it will, do anything and everything that ActiveSync does today to those phones. So unfortunately, there's no definitive list of what that does, because each of the phone manufacturers or device manufacturers can pick and choose between the ActiveSync specification. There's a minimum set of things they have to support. Most of those are required for Exchange connectivity, but after that, everything was optional. Things like pins, things like remote wipe, things like that.
Yep.
So what's actually needed, or what actually each device can do, or what you can manage on each device, is kind of up to the device manufacturer.
Okay. You mentioned Exchange 2010. Is there a limit? Yep. Is that the minimum required Exchange version? And can you do me one quick favor? Can you just move your mouse and get your screen back up?
Yeah, that was my other screen. Yeah, I think I went dark on you there.
Yeah, you did. You did.
That's the light from my other computer. um, so yeah, it has to be Exchange 2010 only. So it's not going to be Exchange 2007.
Right.
And just based upon my experience in the marketplace right now, Exchange 2007. I mean, it was a lot of people went to it, but a lot of people skipped it. And a lot of people that went to it pretty much went to 2010 right away too. So
Sure.
it's I think they made that decision just because some greater capabilities in ActiveSync, and because 2007 wasn't the pervasive version that's out there anymore. So most people have gone to 2010. So
Yep.
there's definitely some limitation there, right? Not every phone supports things. They don't support. Not all of them support the remote device wipe. And of course, once you get to the Android side, it's so fractured on the Android side. God knows what each device is actually going to support. At least on the iPhone side, it's really well defined. And so that's a good thing and it's a bad thing. There are certain things that enterprise customers are asking for that aren't there. But for the most part, it's going to give everyone, that level set. We need an inventory. We need to enforce pins. That's another big one that folks want. We need to enforce a couple of those kind of things, and that will be out of the box with 2012.
Right.
Pretty much for free without actually installing anything on the devices. Also, so that's kind of a step up from what you have to do with anything else. Because it's already ActiveSync on those phones. It's just going to be there. You won't have to do anything to them. And if you had to pull in every phone in your enterprise to do something to them, that'd be a nightmare, I'm sure.
Right.
So it looks to be pretty promising, and it looks to be a great first step, and hopefully they'll keep going with it. But at this point, whether they're going to make it a native client or not, that's still TBD, and I have no insider knowledge on that. So, as far as other devices, though, another kind of neat thing that's coming down the pipe is they announced this at MMS this year. Is they're going to have Unix and Linux native client support in ConfigManager 2012. That won't be out of the box in RTM. It'll probably be sometime after, whether it's like an R2 or an SP1. They haven't decided yet, or if they have, they didn't tell me, which is okay, right? They don't tell me everything. So. So that's kind of cool, right? And so they actually, it was kind of neat sitting through that session because most of the ops manager guys know, and obviously Microsoft knows that things are heterogeneous in most backend environments. Not very few people are completely Microsoft. They at least have that one old piece of junk Linux server sitting there that they want to manage because whatever's running on a DNS or whatever. So they still want to be able to monitor that, and so that's where the ops manager extensions came in. So the next step was being able to manage, being able to push software, hopefully being able to push patches, at least getting a good inventory off of those things.
Right.
And so what they did for the ops manager side, right, is they went and they did the Open Pegasus stuff. And I think they actually brought the guy that wrote Open Pegasus in-house. That was the essentially the Unix, Linux WMI providers and the whole WMI stack for Unix and Linux. And they brought him in-house. And they didn't like Open Pegasus. It was bloated. It has its own issues, even on the ops manager side. I'm sure the ops manager guys are aware of some of the limitations there, but they realized that it was an open source project, so it had its bloat, and it wasn't as good as it could have been. So they brought this guy in house, and he pretty much completely rewrote everything that he did for Open Pegasus, and made it really lean and mean. And so this is essentially a full WMI provider for the Unix and Linux stack. And so it sits right alongside as a first-class citizen with everything else in Config Manager. And you get everything that you normally get with most of the other clients. You're just going to get software distribution. You're going to get all the inventorying. I think software updates is still TBD because that's a whole different mechanism, right, on the Unix Linux side that is on the Windows side. And operating system deployment's not going to be there initially either. But if they get there, that'll be pretty cool. And kind of like on the Ops Manager side, right? It's just another huge selling point of a fabulous product. So
absolutely.
And it was definitely interesting sitting through that session and listening to those guys talk. And I guess a lot of times, you hear people talk about Microsoft being in a crystal castle up there, and they definitely are, right? They're in their ivory tower. But they do their research, and they know where they need to go, and they knew that, we need to extend this cross-plat support because, that just makes our story and our case that much better to get into these enterprise environments and be competitive against the other products that are out on the market, which in general, their only selling point in a lot of these products is just because they were cross-platform. You start going to some of the CA products and Alteryx and that, and they were cross-platform, so that's why they won the bids. They didn't have more capabilities, they weren't better, but they were cross-platform, and so the company didn't have to maintain two products. So that's all changing. So that's a good thing, I think.
Right.
The whole new wave of System Center products is really cool, and They're getting a lot of cool stuff done. So one of the other huge new features in Config Manager 2012 is the whole application deployment model. So that's a really neat piece. They pretty much rewrote everything that they had for software distribution. I wouldn't even call it a rewrite, really. It's a whole new piece, right? The piece that's there today, they left alone. They didn't make any investments in it, and it's still in the product because it can do simple things like run batch files, and it does those kind of things really well, kind of a mini enterprise scheduler, if you will. But they also realize there's a lot of shortcomings, a lot of questions that get asked over and over and over again, like if I deploy this application or I deploy this software, will it install on systems that already have it installed? Or how do I uninstall? Or how do I supersede? And a lot of those questions get asked over and over and over again on the forums and new administrators and things like that. And there were ways to do that in Config Manager 2007 today, but it's not always the greatest way, and it's manual work, really, right? It's something that you would think should be in the product out of the box. And so they took that to heart, and so they wrote this entirely new application management piece that is essentially state-based. So it detects whether an application is already installed or not all by itself. You don't have to do anything special to do it. And so that's cool. If you roll out an application, let's say you roll out, Visio or Office or what have you to your enterprise, if someone already has that installed for whatever reason, you don't want it to reinstall. It's wasted time, wasted resources, disruption to the user, a lot of different reasons there. And so it'll detect that and say, oh, look, it's already installed. Good deal. I'm not going to have to do anything here.
So is that client side or server side? Is the intelligence there that it if you've done a software audit, which you can assume is the case, then it queries the software inventory, or is it hitting the client, the agent side, and going, do I have this installed?
Yeah, it's actually client side. So there's definitely some debate on whether things should be client or server side, and maybe to save some cycles there. But in general, all client activity, or anything that's client centric in Config Manager happens on the client, and so that's one of those, right? Once and they change a lot of the names of things too, right? So once the deployment hits the client actually does the evaluation of the requirements, and if it sees that those requirements are already met, it goes along on a merry way.
I guess that makes sense as well. I mean, particularly in the software deployment, because you create a new package, you set up the schedule, it starts the deployment.
Yep.
And if you've got that on a if that's forced, you want to make sure that that package has gone out, but you don't want it to continually retry and hit the same machines over and over and over again.
Yeah, there's a part of that, and the other benefit that comes, so there's definitely kind of a little bit of a downside, right, if you're not doing all that logic on the server side, but there's really two benefits, right? Scalability is the first thing. If the server is doing everything for the clients, that's going to be a huge server, and he's just not going to be able to manage that many clients, right? You're not going to find another system out there that manages just the sheer volume of clients that Config Manager does.
Right.
And the other huge benefit too, right, is we don't really care about connectivity state of the client at the time something is scheduled. So, if I'm pushing Office out to, my laptops, Office is probably not the greatest example, but any other application, Config Manager is going to cache those files down when it needs them. And if that laptop's not connected at the time it needs to run, no big deal. The client's still going to go ahead and do what it's supposed to do.
Sure.
So that's a huge benefit there too. So definitely some trade-offs there that they made, but I think in the long run they were good trade-offs. And that's kind of the general architecture of Config Manager, all the way back to the SMS days.
Right.
Is making the client do the client work, and kind of following the client-server model, right? Offload things to the client that need to be done by the client. So the other kind of cool part that comes with the state-based is the uninstalls now too. So uninstall is kind of like a full-fledged first-class citizen too. So if I don't want users to have an application, I tell it to uninstall, and it'll actually go and just do the uninstall, and it'll make sure those things happen also. So today in Config Manager, if I deploy something and a user that happens to have admin rights, which is very bad in general, but it happens, or a tech or whoever comes along and says, oh, they don't need that, or vice versa, I'm going to install this software here, then Config Manager has no real knowledge of something that happened after the fact.
Right.
But with 2012, it's going to go back and reevaluate all those deployments on a periodic basis. By default, it's every week, but you can definitely crank that down. So if someone keeps reinstalling World of Warcraft or what have you, Config Manager will keep going and uninstalling it. Or if they have, a piece of software that they are supposed to have that they keep going and uninstalling, it'll go back and clean up and make sure that it does get installed. So that's pretty cool. And then there's the supersedence piece in there. So, I'm deploying Adobe, Reader 8 out to all of my users, and all of a sudden, the new version comes along and we've got Adobe 11 on the works. We can now supersede that within Config Manager. And even though my deployments say deployed Adobe 8, I don't have to change them because the supersedence rules will kick in and say, oh, I need to be installing Adobe 11 now. So that's all pretty cool. So and it will make things a lot more intuitive for the beginning administrators.
Right. So that the supersedence effectively means you don't need multiple packages. You don't need multiple advertisements. It's just all managed from within a single source.
Yeah, exactly right, and that was the intention, so that you can build up, and you can build up a hierarchy of supersedence too, because obviously things like Flash and Reader and other pieces, Silverlight, they get updated on a regular basis, but you don't want to have to necessarily go update all those deployments, and it'll just do those kind of things for you automatically. So that's all really cool.
Sure.
The other piece that comes with it is being able to target users. So today in Config Manager, if you target a user, it works, no problem. And there's definitely good reasons that you'd want to target a user, right? It's not the computer that calls the help desk and says, I want Visio. It's the user that calls the help desk. But does the help desk know that user's computer, especially if that user is using a shared system? And the answer is no. So if you target a user, then you don't have to know those kind of things, and it'll be on whatever system that they're on. The problem is if they move around, now that application is going to get installed on every system that they're on, and that may or may not be a good thing. Most organizations, it's probably not a good thing because it's going to cause disruption to the user and put software on systems that maybe it shouldn't be. So they spend a lot of time and effort going through those scenarios and figuring out how best to deploy software to users. And so they made it a first-class citizen of actually, that's how they want you to do things. That's the primary method is actually to deploy to users. And so they built in logic to figure out what a user's primary system is. And it's a whole thing called user device affinity. And it's called a UDA for short. And so the users can either assign themselves as a primary on a system, and users can assign themselves primary on multiple systems if you allow them to. And systems can have multiple primary users also. Also, administrators can assign primary users. You can import a spreadsheet, or you can do this on a one-on-one basis. Or there's automatic rules that will figure out who is primary user based upon usage times. And so now you can actually deploy software based upon that. So you can say, hey, I'm deploying this to Betty Joe, but only on her primary system. And so if she happens to log on to another system, it won't install anything on those other systems. Taking that to the next level, the other piece that they've also added is the ability to treat different types of deployments exactly the same. So native installs, so you have an MSI installer. Maybe you also have an app-v of the exact same thing, a virtualized application of the exact same application for different usage. And so now I can actually say, hey, if Betty Joe logs onto her primary system, do the full install for her. But if Betty Joe logs onto a non-primary system, deliver the app-v application to her. Or if she logs onto our Citrix web farm, then deliver the XenApp application to her. And so you can combine all these different rules, based upon the different usage scenarios in your environment, and really control where the software goes and where it doesn't go, and who has access to it also. And so that really starts stepping up the granularity and the kind of coolness factor of what you can and can't do, and starts to solve that issue of now I don't have to know what computer users are on, and it makes the help desk job a lot easier, and it'll make the whole experience for users a lot better also. It's really a neat new system, but it's going to be a learning curve for most folks. I think for folks brand new to Config Manager, it probably won't be nearly as big of a deal. And because it's kind of some of those things that you expect to be there. As a new administrator, these are a lot of the questions that they have, and you end up doing quite a bit of work today to get some of those kind of things to work. But now with 2012, they're just going to be there right out of the box. So I think a lot of people are real excited about that. I'm sure there'll be rough edges, as always, but it works pretty well in the betas right now. And so I'm sure they're still fixing things, and it'll be really cool out of the box.
Absolutely. I mean that I know is going to be. There's going to be so many config manager administrators who are going to just be sitting there going, "Oh, about time." You know,
Yeah.
the ability to serve up multiple application paths. You know, whether it's a local application or a virtualized or whatever. I mean, as you said, you can do that at the moment. It's a bit of a mashup and a hack, but what you're talking about is seamless interaction or integration from one technology to the next.
Yep. Yeah, and that's really cool, right? And it's even interesting, right? Because they're incorporating the mobile pieces into it. So, right now in the beta product, it's kind of, we'll see if it's there, but it has the Symbian. So Symbian, you can actually, I don't remember their jar files. I think it's all Java based. So you can actually deploy, if someone happened to log onto their phone, you can deploy those kind of things, and that's the intention of where they're going also. And so, if you extend that to the Unix support, and maybe other platforms that are coming down the line, right? There's another kind of, I wouldn't call them necessarily major, but there is another platform out there that will hopefully come. I don't know anything there either, but it will eventually, I'd assume. But now you can say, hey, if this person logs on to Unix, right, because they're on a kiosk or there's some type of administrator or what have you, I can deliver the Unix version of that application now too.
Right.
And so it's going to be able to figure all that out in the background, and it's all going to be one deployment too. You're not going to have to set up multiple deployments to do these kind of things. You're just going to target that specific user, and then the logic of the deployment is going to go figure out what platform they're on, and it's going to just go do everything that it needs to go do, and without a whole lot of intervention whatsoever by the administrator. So at that point, the user experience really starts aligning with the rest of the kind of the dynamic user experience of users. And there's they don't call it roaming profiles anymore. There's a whole new phrase they have for that. It's something along dynamic user data or something like that.
Yep.
And it starts fitting into that, right? Because there's really, the user can move around, but if they don't have their data, they're kind of dead in the water. So that really addressed that piece. But now, how do you do their applications? Because even if you have your data, if you don't have Microsoft Word to view those DOC files or DOCX files, it doesn't really matter. And so you have to have those two pieces. And so Config Manager is really trying to fulfilling the app piece of that and making sure the apps are everywhere also, and at least available everywhere, no matter where the user logs in, whether it's Citrix, remote desktop, or on their phones is the vision also. So that's kind of interesting. We'll see exactly how that plays out in the enterprise, but I'm sure some folks are going to take advantage of it pretty quick.
I would imagine they will if they're not already. I mean, Config Manager was one of the first products to go to beta out of the new System Center wave. So I think you'll probably find, though they would be definitely in the minority, there's going to be production instances of Config Manager out there already.
Yeah, well, that's probably not a good thing, right? Because unlike Ops Manager, where the product team supports like the RCs for Ops Manager in production, the Config Manager team's real staunch about that one. They don't support anything non-RTM in production. And so, it's specifically in the EULAs, and if you call them with any type of production problem, I would assume that support might give it their best effort.
Right.
But I doubt that you would get a whole lot of sympathy or any real type of expert level support from them. They would just kind of say too bad, and the product team definitely would.
Okay, so there you go. I made an assumption as an ops manager guy. I just assumed that everyone was on the same page, but clearly not. We actually I won't get into a battle between the config manager and ops manager guys. I mean that's ludicrous and childlike.
Well, the product teams definitely have their different philosophies, and I've seen that. Being good friends with Cameron, and I've met some of the ops manager PMs and that, and there's definitely some differences, and how they go about doing things. Good, bad, and different. I don't know. Config Manager. I guess on one side, Ops Manager doesn't really change your environment. It's just looking at your environment. Whereas Config Manager is actually meant to make changes to your environment.
Sure.
So I could see, just from that right there, I can see why there should be a difference between what they support and don't support. And the question comes up too, if I install beta or RC, is there an upgrade path to RTM? And the answer is no, right? Can you pull it off? Maybe, but who knows what kind of issues you're going to have, because it's not a path that they extensively test at all. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I should point out, Jason mentioned Cameron in reference to Cameron Fuller, who was hoping to be on the podcast today. Unfortunately, he had, well, I won't say technical difficulties. He's on a client side at the moment, and his internet connection is, shall we say, not sufficient to broadcast either audio, let alone video. So Cameron wasn't able to join us. So unfortunately, you're stuck with my good self. But fortunately, we do have Jason Sandys with us. Jason, anything else on the ConfigMgr 2012 front that you wanted to discuss?
And I guess the only other big hanging question out there always, right? Well, I guess there's kind of two, right? When? And so this is another one where the config manager team has been real staunch about what they publicly stated, and they said second half of 2012, and they've been saying that for like 18 months.
Really, second half of 2012?
I'm sorry, 2011. So
okay.
I always say 2011 just because the product's 2012, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's 2011.
Yep.
But if you look at the calendar, of course, we're already in the second half of 2011. So
Sure.
It's imminent, probably not the right word, but pretty close. And beta's been out for a little while now. There should be an RC. To my knowledge, all Microsoft products have an RC now, so there should be a public RC at some point here, hopefully within the next few months, and then we'll see. Right, if they don't get it in the next few months, then they're going to miss that second half. But I haven't heard or seen any reason why they're going to miss any of those things.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, as a TAP, and I would imagine a CEP participant, have you seen anything within the Connect site that would lead you to believe that there's major bugs left, or are we talking, minor stuff?
With a product so big as Config Manager, I don't think there's many products nearly as big. Exchange and obviously Windows probably is. And it's funny talking to the product group always, because they always have one of the things they always let us know about is the oldest bug on record. And even going into Config Manager 2007, they still had bugs from SMS 2.0 that were still in the database, right? That they hadn't fixed yet.
Right.
So I'm sure that the bug database is huge, and it has lots of stuff, but it really comes down to showstoppers and things that have real impact. Some of the things are super minor or kind of functionality change type things.
Yep.
At this point, there's always things, right? And the product continues to grow, so I'm definitely not an expert in every area anymore. And so I'm sure there's things they're still fixing, and they'll be fixing right up until RTM releases, and then they'll start working on those bugs afterwards and start working on SP1 pretty much right away. So I'm sure there's things, but I don't know of anything specific.
Okay.
And I said there were going to be two things. The other thing is upgrade now. So a lot of people are looking at modifying their 2007 hierarchies now, or what do we do with 2012 being imminent? And that's should we, or if you're a new customer, should we deploy Config Manager now, or should we just go ahead and wait for 2012? And that's a huge or a tough question for anyone to really answer. Whether I know all the details or not, but 2012 is going to be exciting. So it's kind of hard to really recommend someone to go to 2007 today unless they need that functionality today. It's a great product, and you're going to learn a lot. There's a lot of the insides and internals are the same, but actually doing that exercise twice within 6 months, especially if you're planning to go into 2012 right away, it'd be hard to recommend that as just as a consultant in general,
right.
Unless you want to pay me to do them both. So that's a whole different story.
And in that case, they can get in contact with you by
catapultsystems.com, right? That's
go.
That's both Cameron and I work for Catapult, along with there's at least one other MVP.
Yep.
It changes every now and then. So Chris Knackers is another configuration manager MVP that works for us.
Okay.
And so catapultsystems.com, we get a lot of leads via our website, and do a lot of work for a lot of folks all over the place.
Sure. Alternatively, get in contact with Microsoft, and they can point you in the direction of a good consulting firm. We don't take sides here.
Yeah, we're not international, so although we have done some international work, but
okay. All right. Well, if you never ever need a consultant in the UK, moving right along. So Windows Intune, we briefly touched on that at the top of the show. Shall we talk about this a little bit more in depth? And the only reason I say that is that Windows Intune 2 was released I guess, about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago now. So if we can, I guess briefly touch on some of the features and capabilities of that,
Yep.
I think that may be of benefit.
Yeah, so I honestly don't know all the details. The biggest one that I remember seeing and just the news feeds and that was that software distribution is enabled. Now they were the way they worded it. I think it's just for MSIs, for actual Windows installers. So you're not going to be able to do EXEs and things like that. And that's really trying to get on a feature parity with ConfigMgr. And I think at some point, I don't remember who said this. I don't know if it was Josh, the program manager I was talking about before, or if it was Brad Anderson or someone like that. But their intention is for feature parity between inTune and ConfigMgr by 2015, if my memory serves me correctly. So that's not too far down the road, right? 3.5 years or so.
Right. So this
4
is
years.
These are small baby steps, I guess. That being the
Exactly.
case, inTune's one or Intune 1 really felt like a beta more than a release product.
It was.
Sorry,
It was to get people's feet wet and to really handle that low hanging fruit because System Center Essentials isn't moving forward in the new product stack.
Right.
So they needed a replacement for that too.
Yep. And Intunes too, as you say, it adds or brings in some of the other capabilities, I guess, those that, I guess the squeaky wheel gets the oil, as the saying goes, Microsoft probably listened to the reaction from Intunes 1 and most people were probably saying, where's the software deployment capabilities? So they've gone some way to that by allowing you to deploy MSIs, but they've stopped short by giving you full control and full capabilities.
Yep, but I'm sure that that's all on the way, and I guess the advantage, right? One of the huge advantages that software as a service, not as a business model, but from a technical perspective, has is that you can upgrade the backend infrastructure a lot easier, right? You don't have to, since it's not an on-prem product, you don't have to rely on people buying the product and upgrading it. You can do all that on the back end. You're the one maintaining the service, and so they can roll those kind of things out a lot quicker. They don't have to do exactly the same things. The testing cycles, I'm sure, are completely different because they don't have to test all the installation and all those kind of things nearly as rigorously because it's essentially a one-time installation.
Right. I mean, the different scenarios, they don't have to test it against different operating systems and different outcomes and the minutiae of one setup to another. They control the whole back end, as you say. So, they control how it's deployed.
Yep. So it's that whole agility piece that comes with the public cloud in general,
Right.
and so they'll be able to roll stuff out, and I'm pretty sure that that's their intention, right? Is to roll out those new feature sets on a regular basis, and so until they get to that feature parity. And I don't know. I guess there's things they probably can do that ConfigMgr can't do today. That's a bad saying for me, I know, but I'm sure there are things, right, that people want, and maybe the mobile device management is a piece that they pick up on a little bit quicker or something like that. So it really just depends upon where their customer demand is, and of course where they see that they're going to be able to make money too, right? That's always kind of the bottom line for everything.
Yeah, although I guess one of the key things in a software as a service is the money comes from the subscriptions. They're not relying on releasing an R2 version which only goes to SA customers, which pushes some customers towards getting an SA agreement. It's a new feature is complete. They just add it to the application and it goes live. The purpose of extending the capabilities is to catch those users or businesses who are in a point where they're kind of going, Intune's almost there. We can almost move away from our old legacy system that we're using for application deployment. We just need to wait until we get X, Y, or Z. And normally they'll contact Microsoft and say, when can we expect that particular feature? And squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Yep. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of good things, and it's like you said, it's that whole private cloud. It's the promise of the private cloud and the public cloud, really, or a hybrid cloud, or however you want to characterize it. I mean, in this case, it's definitely a public cloud, a software as a service hosted in the public cloud.
Right.
And that just it seems to fit. It seems to really resonate with businesses for a lot of different reasons, and even on the technical side, right? If I can get away from managing some of those kind of one-off type things, managing that server that in a lot of shops, even the config manager server sits there for weeks on end with nobody doing anything to it. And if I can get away from managing that, having to patch that on myself, and having to be that in-depth config manager server side expert, and just managing my clients, that's what a lot of folks are looking for. So.
Right, absolutely. And off the back of this, I guess one thing that a lot of us consultants are going to have to start looking at is ADFS. Federation services for Active Directory becomes and plays a key part in a lot of these services where you've got, inTune is one of those services where you can federate ADFS, so you can federate your Active Directory. And what that does do is it extends your Active Directory security model out to inTune, and you can control it, the same way essentially as you would through AD.
Yep. Yeah, the people are seeing that with Office 365 today.
Right. Yep.
Having it do the federation, and so federations is a big thing, and I guess people have been talking about it for a while with PKI. I want to send encrypted emails to this other organization, and so the concept's been out there for a while, and so. The solutions are just starting to follow up and even be able to host Active Directory out in the public cloud, or kind of in a hybrid cloud scenario. They're starting to talk about that, and there's folks that are already doing that, putting their DCs out into not necessarily the public cloud, but in a hosted private cloud somewhere.
Right.
And so we're not too far away from a lot of that stuff being commonplace.
Yeah, look, I did a DDC, or dynamic data center implementation, earlier this year, where ADFS was one of the core components, and they had, whether it was an RODC or a fully fledged domain controller on premise within a hosted environment, and you will start to see more and more of that. What else have you got for us? Anything else you feel is relevant to the?
It's definitely wide open. I guess just for folks out there that are looking at Config Manager, a lot of the TechNet documentation is already starting to get updated for 2012. So they've got kind of beta-ish documentation up there, so people can go check that out. It's a pretty easy web search, Config Manager TechNet, and it should take you right there. And we're all real excited about it. So as we are with the rest of the whole product stack, the whole System Center product stack. So
sure.
I encourage everyone to go out there and at least check it out, because there's something for everyone out there.
Definitely, and I apologize. Anyone watching online at the moment, I did tut and sort of roll my eyes because my switching capability, my switching skills leave something to be desired from a video perspective. I flicked my video on with Jason's lower third. Anyway, we'll move on. Showing my incompetence. Although, please bear with me, this is kind of my second attempt at this, so it's there you go. So should we spend, I don't know, 2 minutes discussing Windows Server 8? I mean, the again, Windows build, they did. The main focus was Windows 8 for the desktop, that is, because it is a developer conference. There is no real server conference. I guess there's TechEd and there's MMS, but there was bits and pieces about Windows Server 8, but nothing of any real meat. So did you happen to catch any info on Server 8?
Yeah, so the only stuff I've seen are in a couple tweets and some blogs, mainly about Hyper-V. I guess I saw a couple of screenshots about the new server manager, but everything else is kind of Hyper-V and Hyper-V 3.0 and scalability, taking it up to, I don't remember the numbers anymore, but as far as number of processors and memory, and then them introducing a new VHD format. So there's a VHDX format that it's supposed to break the 2 terabyte boundary so that you can have larger VHDs than that. And then the other piece was for live migration, being able to do multiple live migrations at the same time. So getting on par with the VMware vMotion of being able to do those kind of things. And then the requirements have changed a little bit. There were some hardware requirements that are stepped up a little bit. There's and I don't remember what they're called anymore. There's a couple of pieces on the hardware that need to be there now, both on the AMD and the Intel side. So. That might be a stumbling block for some folks on some older hardware, but presumably if you're standing up a new farm, you're definitely installing new hardware there. So,
Sure,
so that looks to be pretty cool.
yeah, and let's be honest. People aren't going to be running out and installing Windows Server 8 over and above their existing infrastructure. It's no different to any other server OS that's been released. That your daughter's home from school, is she?
Yep, both of them are home from school.
Hello.
You can wave hello, Mara.
Thanks for watching at home.
And the other one.
So those
Yep.
those
She's
listening
got to get
in,
on camera too.
Yep, those listening in.
Go on, babies. Go.
Aw, Daddy.
That'll be all right.
Yeah, you're not going to see businesses rush to adopt this in any mass way, insofar as, rebuilding servers just because they've got Windows Server 8. I mean, that historically that's never happened, so I can't see it happening with Server 8. There's some...
Yeah, it'll be attrition. It'll be an attrition thing, as the server always is. I mean, there's still that one NT4 server sitting in a lot of larger organizations. It's sitting over in the corner that everyone's praying to God and doesn't go down, right? And same with 2000 and even 2003 nowadays. So.
Yeah. I mean, the uptake within the corporate space is always a lot slower than it is within the consumer market, that's for sure. That being said, what do you think of Windows 8?
I mean, I'm really encouraged by them. They're really trying to redefine some things, and if you look at the tweets, obviously, as far as from aesthetic point of view, from kind of the intellectual property point of view, everyone always oohs and ahs at that fruit company. Rightly, wrongly, indifferently, that's a whole separate discussion. And based upon what they're doing here, they're really trying to define their own stuff and making it clear that they're defining their own stuff too, and really taking it to the next level. So I think just from a business perspective, that's a great thing for Microsoft, and the press they've gotten off of this way early release of Windows 8 has been fabulous for them, and obviously it's no secret that I'm very much in bed with Microsoft as far as being a supporter of, and I know who puts the food on the table for me, so that's real encouraging for me. To know that they're very committed to doing those kind of things. Windows 7 was really one of the first waves of that. I think that the whole System Center stack now is another example of that too. So that's kind of cool. They've really put the time in to make sure that everything is finished, polished, and exactly the way it needs to be, and not those we didn't feel like doing it, or we didn't get to that, which has been often the excuse in the past. So
right. I mean, I guess the encouraging thing from Microsoft's perspective, and perhaps it's not necessarily reflective, but the statistics I heard was after they announced the availability of the build developer preview, they had 500,000 hits within the first 24 hours or something like that, or 500,000 downloads.
Yeah,
so, I mean,
it was the downloads. Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean that's encouraging for them, I guess, to have that out there, and that number now probably exceeds 1.5 million downloads, I would imagine. I don't think they're releasing statistics all that quickly, but no, I don't have a touch capable laptop, but I installed that on my Dell laptop, and the Metro UI. I'm going to say it doesn't feel right with a keyboard and mouse.
And exactly, and that's when I loaded it on my tablet here at home, it just fits real well, and I had Windows 7 on the tablet before, and it worked all right. It did the touch, it did decent, but there were things that just didn't work quite right, clicking little X's, things like that.
Yep.
And so Metro really steps that up, obviously, because Metro was completely designed for the touch. So that it makes my tablet, not that it wasn't usable before, but it makes it a lot more usable now.
Right, and I mean Microsoft continually kept using the term, touch first, but I can't see anyone who has a standard laptop ever using Metro UI, except perhaps for a quick launch. But they showed during the keynote, the pinch to zoom, and you can zoom out and rename this and rename. Well, I mean, it's not an easy process doing that with a keyboard and a mouse. I spent 5 minutes and just went, no, I don't really need to anyway. So,
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can really see that.
yeah. I think you'll see more people with a normal laptop disabling the Metro UI than leaving it open. But enough.
Yeah, and that's still a real early release. There's a big story they still have to figure out. So I guess a lot
Right.
of people are assuming, hey, this is exactly what it's going to be like. And I think all of us that have been around for a while, we saw Longhorn, right? If people remember Longhorn, they pretty much completely threw Longhorn away. That was
Right.
interim between XP and Vista there.
Such a
And
pity.
not to say that they're going to throw away this stuff, but they've got a long way to go, and they've got a lot of work they need to do. But they have a lot of capable people and have a lot of ability to do those kind of things. So
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I'm excited by the progress that they're making and the steps that they're taking. But the proof is in the pudding. I think I've heard that a few times this week as well, and we'll wait to see what the outcome is like.
definitely, yeah, I'm excited about it.
So I know this has been a little bit of a stretch. This is Inside Central, so as a general rule of thumb, this podcast is aimed at digging into the forums at the System Center Central website, and I do encourage you to go over there and sign up if you haven't already. As I said at the top of the show, we really haven't had a great deal of coverage around Configurations Manager, so it's nice to have Jason on the show, and we thought we'd take the opportunity to delve off in a sideways direction. Although having said that, there have been quite a few posts over at SEC in the forums discussing, the future of Config Manager and what to expect. Jason indicated that a lot of the conversation was around the mobile device management, which is why we thought that was a valid topic for this week.
Yep.
So,
there's
sorry, go right ahead.
no, go ahead. You had a thought there.
No, I was just going to say, I just wanted to remind our listeners that we do have a competition going on at the moment. It's the Big Book Bundle giveaway prize thing. I, for the life of me, can't remember what it's called now, and I'm running the goddamn thing. So if you head on over to systemcenterpodcast.com, as I am doing right now, click on the big banner at the on the homepage, which is that will take you straight into the details for the competition. It is the Big Tech Book Bundle giveaway. There you go. I really should have given it an easier name. Follow the instructions there. Essentially, what we're doing and what we're trying to do is just to try and generate some traffic to the podcast. We're trying to get it out there. We're trying to get trying to build our audience and get the message out to the masses. As we grow, our ability to provide additional content grows. Our ability to provide new and exciting podcasts grows, and our ability to get your feedback. We would love to hear from our listeners and tell us what you think. If you've got a suggestion for a podcast topic that you'd like to hear, by all means, please send it in to Dan at systemcenterpodcast.com. If you think you've got a good idea for a podcast, if you want to host your own podcast, if you want to join me once a week to talk about something that's enterprise tech related, then again, feel free to ping me an email at dan at systemcenterpodcast.com. We really want to try and grow the network and provide relevant enterprise level information to the tech guys and girls out there who love to lap this up. So again, the purpose of the competition is to try and generate a little bit of noise around the System Center podcast. So if you send out a tweet with #SC podcast in it, then you'll go in the draw. But that being said, head on over to systemcenterpodcast.com, click on the big banner, and help us to increase our audience. The prizes on offer are everybody who is a winner will get a copy of the System Center Opalus integration server unleashed, a copy of the PowerShell 2.0 Bible, Operations Manager Unleashed, Config Manager Unleashed, and any other books that we can scrounge up. So we'll probably give away 3 or 4 sets of these to the lucky winners. So yeah, get yourself tweeting, like us on Facebook, just do what you can. I guess. You can also, on the System Center podcast website, down the bottom left, is a donation. This podcast isn't free, at least not from an operational standpoint. So your money goes to assisting me in paying for this fine podcast. Enough of me. Jason, it's been been fun having you on. Very informative. I must admit the config manager stuff generally tends to, I won't say it flies over my head. It generally tends to slap me in the forehead and disorientate me a little bit. So it's been great to have you on. You've given us, or at least me, a great insight into what we can expect within the mobile space and certainly the application space as well. So really appreciate you taking the time out to come in.
No worries. Thanks a lot, Dan. It's been fun.
Now, with any luck, we can get you back as a semi-regular or even a regular. It's nice to have a config manager person who can give us their perspective on the show. So, if you've got time, we'd love to have you back as a regular. I know Pete would love to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have an issue with that at all. I think that'd be great.
Awesome. You heard it here, folks. So once again, Jason is a configurations manager, MVP. He's got extensive experience within the IT industry. He's an all-round good guy. And as you've heard here, he certainly knows his stuff when it comes to config manager. So, Jason, again, many thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. Everybody out there, have a good day.
And you have been listening to Inside Central. Stay tuned next week. With any luck, Peter will be back. And I'll be grilling him on today's content to see whether he actually bothered to listen. But again, you've been listening to Inside Central. Feedback, questions, concerns, over to dan@systemcenterpodcast.com. This has been Inside Central. You have yourselves a good weekend, unless you're listening to this Monday, in which case, why would you want to listen to my voice first thing Monday morning? Monday's depressing enough without having to listen to me. Take care, take it easy, and we'll talk to you next week.